Centuries ago, a man sat beneath a candle's flicker, staring into a bowl of dark water. The air trembled as he whispered visions of cities burning, kings dying, and worlds yet unborn. His name, Michel de Nostradamus, known forever as Nostradamus. But what if his prophecies were not just poetry, but encrypted messages meant for the future? Welcome to MystiChrono, where time speaks and we listen. The 1. The Apothecary of Secrets. Bis 1, DD 2. 1. Born in 1503 in France, Nostradamus began not as a prophet, but as a healer, a man of medicine during the Black Plague. As death swept through Europe, he studied herbs, stars, and ancient alchemical texts. Some say it was during this time that his visions began, dreams that blurred the line between science and the supernatural. 1. The Celestial Code. 2. Sartuch de 3 Mars. Nostradamus believed the cosmos was a clock, and every planetary alignment was a message. His Centuries, a collection of over 900 quatrains, was his way of writing the future without getting executed for witchcraft. Each verse was a puzzle, metaphors, hidden names, reversed letters, and astrological clues. 1. The Great Fire of London. 3. 4. Ho. The blood of the just will be demanded of London, burnt by fire in the year 66. That's what Nostradamus wrote. And in 1666, the Great Fire of London consumed the city. Coincidence, or a prediction written a century earlier? 1. The Rise of Napoleon. 4 Sariju 5 Ains. Another verse speaks of an emperor born near Italy who would cost the empire dear. Historians later connected this to Napoleon Bonaparte, who indeed reshaped Europe through war, fulfilling every word of the prophecy. 1. The Shadow of Hitler. 5 Zasesu Shitsexau. From the depths of the west of Europe, a young child shall be born of poor people. He will seduce a great troop by his tongue and bring fire to the great world. The description eerily mirrors Adolf Hitler, his rise from poverty, his fiery speeches, and the global destruction that followed. 1. The Death of Kings. 6 Dautum 7 August. Nostradamus even predicted the death of King Henry II of France, describing a duel where the king would die from a wound to the eye. A horrifyingly accurate vision of the king's fatal jousting accident in 1559. A comprehensive account of a compelling and controversial topic, whose bitter legacy resonates to this day. Jonathan Phillips, published in Volume 65, Issue 5. May 2015. Crusaders embark for the Levant. From Le Roman de Godefroy de Bouillon, France, Section 27. Bibliothèque nationale, Bridgman Image. Crusaders embarquent for the Levant. From Le Roman de Godefroy de Bouillon, France, Section 37. Bibliothèque nationale, Bridgman Image. During the last 4 decades, the Crusades have become one of the most dynamic areas of historical inquiry, which points to an increasing curiosity to understand and interpret these extraordinary events. What persuaded people in the Christian West to want to recapture Jerusalem? What impact did the success of the First Crusade, 1099, have on the Muslim, Christian, and Jewish communities of the Eastern Mediterranean? What was the effect of crusading on the people and institutions of Western Europe? How did people record the Crusades, and finally, what is their legacy? Academic debate moved forward significantly during the 1980s, as discussion concerning the definition of a crusade gathered real steam. Understanding of the scope of the Crusades widened with a new recognition that crusading extended far beyond the original 11th century expeditions to the Holy Land, both in terms of chronology and scope. That is, they took place long after the end of the Frankish hold on the East, 1291, and continued down to the 16th century. With regards to their target, crusades were also called against the Muslims of the Iberian Peninsula, the pagan peoples of the Baltic region, the Mongols, political opponents of the papacy and heretics, such as the Cathars or the Hussites. An acceptance of this framework, as well as the centrality of papal authorization for such expeditions, is generally referred to as the pluralist position. Download our special issue on the history of the Crusades. The emergence of this interpretation energized the existing field and had the effect of drawing in a far greater number of scholars. Alongside this came a growing interest in re-evaluating the motives of crusaders, with some of the existing emphases on money being downplayed and the cliché of landless younger sons out for adventure being laid to rest. Through the use of a broader range of evidence than ever before, especially charters, that is sales or loans of lands and/or rights, a stress on contemporary religious impulses as the dominant driver for, particularly the First Crusade, came through. Yet the wider world intruded on, and then, in some ways, stimulated this academic debate. The horrors of 9/11 and President George W. Bush's disastrous use of the word crusade to describe the war on terror fed the extremists' message of hate, and the notion of a longer, wider conflict between Islam and the West, dating back to the medieval period, became extremely prominent. In reality, of course, such a simplistic view is deeply flawed, but it is a powerful shorthand for extremists of all persuasions, from Osama bin Laden to Anders Breivik to ISIS, and certainly provided an impetus to study the legacy of the crusading age into the modern world, as we will see here, calling on the extensive online archive of history today. The First Crusade was called in November 1095 by Pope Urban II at the town of Clermont in central France. The Pope made a proposal: whoever for devotion alone, but not to gain honor or money, goes to Jerusalem to liberate the Church of God can substitute this journey for all penance. This appeal was the combination of a number of contemporary trends, along with the inspiration of Urban himself, who added particular innovations to the mix. For several decades, Christians had been pushing back at Muslim lands on the edge of Europe, in the Iberian Peninsula, for example, as well as in Sicily. In some instances, the Church had become involved in these events through the offer of limited spiritual rewards for participants. The Council of Clermont and the arrival of Pope Urban II. Bibliothèque Nationale, Bridgman Images. The Council of Clermont and the arrival of Pope Urban II. Bibliothèque Nationale, Bridgman Images. Urban was responsible for the spiritual well-being of his flock, and the crusade presented an opportunity for the sinful knights of Western Europe to cease their endless infighting and exploitation of the weak, lay people and churchmen alike, and to make good their violent lives. Urban saw the campaign as a chance for knights to direct their energies towards what was seen as a spiritually meritorious act, namely, the recovery of the holy city of Jerusalem from Islam. The Muslims had taken Jerusalem in 637. In return for this, they would, in effect, be forgiven those sins they had confessed. This, in turn, would save them from the prospect of eternal damnation in the fires of hell, a fate repeatedly emphasized by the Church as the consequence of a sinful life. To find out more, see Marcus Bull, who reveals the religious context of the campaign in his 1997 article. Within an age of such intense religiosity, the city of Jerusalem, as the place where Christ lived, walked and died, held a central role. When the aim of liberating Jerusalem was coupled to lurid, probably exaggerated stories of the maltreatment of both the Levant's native Christians and Western pilgrims, the desire for vengeance, along with the opportunity for spiritual advancement, formed a hugely potent combination. Urban would be looking after his flock and improving the spiritual condition of Western Europe too. The fact that the papacy was engaged in a mighty struggle with the German emperor, Henry IV, the investiture controversy, and that calling the crusade would enhance the Pope's standing, was an opportunity too good for Urban to miss. A spark to this dry tinder came from another Christian force, the Byzantine Empire. Emperor Alexios III feared the advance of the Seljuk Turks towards his capital city of Constantinople. The Byzantines were Greek Orthodox Christians but, since 1054, had been in a state of schism with the Catholic Church. The launch of the crusade presented Urban with a chance to move closer to the Orthodox and to heal the rift. The reaction to Urban's appeal was astounding, and news of the expedition rippled across much of the Latin West. Thousands saw this as a new way to attain salvation and to avoid the consequences of their sinful lives. Yet aspirations of honor, adventure, financial gain, and for a very small number, land. In the event, most of the first crusaders returned home after the expedition ended. May well have figured too. While churchmen frowned upon worldly motives because they believed that such sinful aims would incur God's displeasure, many laymen had little difficulty in accommodating these alongside their religiosity. Thus, Stephen of Blois, one of the senior men on the campaign, could write home to his wife, Adela of Blois, daughter of William the Conqueror, that he had been given valuable gifts and honors by the emperor, and that he now had twice as much gold, silver, and other riches as when he left the West. People of all social ranks, except kings, joined the First Crusade, although an initial rush of ill-disciplined zealots sparked an horrific outbreak of anti-Semitism, especially in the Rhineland, as they sought to finance their expedition by taking Jewish money and to attack a group perceived as the enemies of Christ in their own lands. These contingents, known as the People's Crusade, caused real problems outside Constantinople before Alexios ushered them over the Bosporus and into Asia Minor, where the Seljuk Turks destroyed them. Led by a series of senior nobles, the main armies gathered in Constantinople during 1096. Alexios had not expected such a huge number of Westerners to appear on his doorstep, but saw the chance to recover land lost to the Turks. Given the Crusaders' need for food and transport, the emperor held the upper hand in this relationship, although this is not to say that he was anything other than cautious in dealing with the new arrivals, particularly in the aftermath of the trouble caused by the People's Crusade, and the fact that the main armies included a large Norman Sicilian contingent, a group who had invaded Byzantine lands as recently as 1081, see Peter Frankopan. Most of the Crusade leaders swore oaths to Alexios, promising to hand over to him lands formerly held by the Byzantines in return for supplies, guides, and luxury gifts. In June 1097, the Crusaders and the Greeks took one of the emperor's key objectives, the formidable walled city of Nicaea, 120 miles from Constantinople. Although in the aftermath of the victory, some writers reported Frankish discontent at the division of booty. The Crusaders moved inland, heading across the Anatolian plain. A large Turkish army attacked the troops of Bohemond of Taranto, near Dorylaeum. The Crusaders were marching in separate contingents, and this, plus the unfamiliar tactics of swift attacks by mounted horse archers, almost saw them defeated until the arrival of forces under Raymond of Toulouse and Godfrey of Bouillon saved the day. This hard-won victory proved an invaluable lesson for the Christians, and, as the expedition went on, the military cohesion of the Crusader army grew and grew, making them an ever more effective force. Over the next few months, the army, under Count Baldwin of Boulogne, crossed Asia Minor, with some contingents taking the Cilician towns of Tarsus and Mamistra and others, heading via Cappadocia towards the eastern Christian lands of Edessa, biblical Rohais, where the largely Armenian population welcomed the Crusaders. Local political conflict meant Baldwin was able to take power himself, and thus, in 1098, the first so-called Crusader state, the county of Edessa, came into being. Baldwin I, king of Jerusalem, c. 1118, from the Abrégé de la Chronique de Jerusalem, France, 15th century, de Agostini, Bridgeman. Images Baldwin Thrums, king of Jerusalem, c. 1118, from the Abrégé de la Chronique de Jerusalem, France, 15th century, de Agostini, Bridgeman images. By this time, the bulk of the army had reached Antioch, today just inside the southern Turkish border with Syria. This huge city had been a Roman settlement. To Christians, it was significant as the place where Saints Peter and Paul had lived, and it was one of the 5 patriarchal seats of the Christian Church. It was also important to the Byzantines, having been a major city in their empire as recently as 1084. The site was too big to surround properly, but the Crusaders did their best to squeeze the place into submission. Over the winter of 1097, conditions became extremely harsh, although the arrival of a Genoese fleet in the spring of 1098 provided some useful support. The stalemate was only ended when Bohemond persuaded a local Christian to betray one of the towers, and on June 3, 1098, the Crusaders broke into the city and captured it. Their victory was not complete, however, because the citadel, towering over the site, remained in Muslim hands, a problem compounded by the news that a large Muslim relief army was approaching from Mosul. Lack of food and the loss of most of their horses, essential for the knights of course, meant that morale was at rock bottom. Count Stephen of Blois, one of the most senior figures on the crusade, along with a few other men, had recently deserted, believing the expedition doomed. They met Emperor Alexios, who was bringing long-awaited reinforcements, and told him that the crusade was a hopeless cause. Thus, in good faith, the Greek ruler turned back. In Antioch, meanwhile, the Crusaders had been inspired by the discovery of a relic of the Holy Lance, the spear that had pierced Christ's side as he was on the cross. A vision told a cleric in Raymond of St. Gilles' army where to dig, and sure enough, there the object was found. Some regarded this as a touch convenient and too easy a boost to the standing of the Provençal contingent, but to the masses, it acted as a vital inspiration. A couple of weeks later, on June 28, 1098, the Crusaders gathered their last few hundred horses together, drew themselves into their now familiar battle lines, and charged the Muslim forces. With writers reporting the aid of warrior saints in the sky, the Crusaders triumphed, and the citadel duly surrendered, leaving them in full control of Antioch before the Muslim relief army arrived. If your bookshelf is filled with dusty old tomes, your search history is 90% conspiracy theories, and you love a good mystery, you're officially a history buff, and this one's for you. Centuries ago, Michel de Nostradamus, was more healer than prophet. Battling the Black Plague, he studied medicine, herbs, and the midnight sky, where science blurred into something stranger. He believed the cosmos was a giant clock, and every planetary shift whispered hidden messages. But in a world where predicting the future could get you burned at the stake, Nostradamus hid his visions in puzzles, 900 cryptic quatrains, full of codes, metaphors, and riddles. So, were his prophecies just poetry, or encrypted warnings meant for us? London burned in 1666, Napoleon rose near Italy, and a child from the west of Europe, sounding eerily like Hitler, led the world to war. Coincidence? Or did Nostradamus really see the shadows of history before they fell? Maybe that's the real mystery. His words still haunt us because they remind us the future isn't set in stone. Maybe it's a warning. Maybe it's an invitation to pay attention, to question, to shape what happens next. You've been watching MystiChrono. Subscribe, because the next prophecy could be unfolding right now.